Hello, my name is Aurora. I asked my sister what time the engagement dinner was, and she looked me straight in the eye and said, "Oh, that wasn't for you, just close family." That was the moment I realized they had erased me, but it didn't stop there. I was cropped out of photos, deleted from invitations, and even forced to watch my own mother's inheritance signed away. They planned a wedding on my name while pretending I didn't exist. What would you do if your own family decided you weren't family at all? I left the community center just as the sun was dipping behind the horizon, the Portland sky turning that familiar pink gray I had seen 1,000 times before. My shoes felt heavy from standing most of the day, and my hands smelled faintly of disinfectant wipes after helping clean the craft tables where the seniors had been painting earlier. It had been a long shift, but a good one. Mrs. Peterson had laughed when I showed her how to send her very first email, and the kids from the after-school program had left with backpacks full of snacks. Those were the little victories I clung to, moments that made the exhaustion worth it. Still, walking toward my car in the dim lot, I couldn't shake a strange restlessness. Being the youngest in my family had always meant wearing the invisible cloak of the helper. I wasn't the one people invited to speak or even asked for advice. I was the one expected to pick up groceries, to feed pets, to keep things tidy in the background. And yet, with Malvoria's engagement dinner happening this week, a flicker of hope sat in me. Maybe this time things would be different. Maybe they'd remember I was more than just convenient hands. Driving home, I let NPR play softly on the radio, catching fragments of the day's news. My thoughts kept circling the same thing. An engagement dinner isn't just another party. In American families, it's a statement. It says who matters, who belongs, who stands closest to the bride and groom. If I were included, it would mean, at least for one night, that I was counted. That thought alone warmed me enough to silence the doubts. By the time I reached the driveway, the porch light was already on. I slipped inside, dropped my keys on the counter, and automatically checked my phone. No missed calls, no texts. I tried not to read into it. I set a pot of water to boil, thinking a simple bowl of pasta would do, when the phone finally buzzed on the counter. It was a message from Malvoria. "Can you feed Dad's dog tonight? Guests will arrive at 6. I stared at the words, my pulse quickening. Guests. At 6. It had to be the dinner. She hadn't said engagement dinner, but what else could it be? I set the phone down, picked it up again. The phrasing was so typically her, short, vague, never spelling out what she thought I should already know. But this time, instead of annoyance, I felt hope. Maybe it was her way of including me without fuss. Maybe she just assumed I understood I was invited. Maybe this time they'll remember me, I whispered to the quiet kitchen. I poured the pasta into the boiling water, but I barely tasted anything. My head was already at that dinner table, imagining myself sitting beside cousins I hadn't seen in months, maybe even laughing with Dad. A voice inside me reminded me of something I'd once read from Maya Angelou. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Malvoria had shown me plenty of times that I wasn't in her circle, and yet I still reached for hope, as if this time might be the exception. As the clock ticked closer to 6, I gave in to my curiosity. I dialed her number. She answered on the second ring, her voice smooth and practiced. "Aurora, hi, what's up?" I cleared my throat, trying to sound casual. "Hey, I was just checking. What time should I come over for the engagement dinner?" There was a pause, not long, but long enough for my stomach to tighten. Then she laughed lightly, as though I'd said something absurd. "Oh, that wasn't for you. Just close family." Her words landed like a slap. For a second, all I heard was the hum of the refrigerator behind me, the faint bubbling of water on the stove. My grip tightened around the phone. "Just close family?" I repeated, my voice quieter than I intended. "Yes," she said breezily, already moving on. "It's nothing personal. We just wanted to keep it small." I tried to swallow, but my throat felt dry. "I am family." Silence. Then a faint sigh, the kind that dripped with condescension. "Aurora, don't make this complicated. We'll see you at the wedding. I've got to go." The line went dead before I could form another word. I stood there, phone still pressed to my ear, staring at the kitchen clock. The second hand moved in deliberate ticks, as if mocking me. Outside, the neighbor's dog barked, muffled through the window, as if on cue with the emptiness spreading in my chest. The humiliation wasn't in her exact words, but in what they implied. I wasn't considered close. Not close enough to share a table, not close enough to be in the photos that would be posted tomorrow. I set the phone down slowly, palms sweaty, heart thudding in my ears. The pasta boiled over, hissing as water spilled onto the stove. I didn't move to stop it. Just close family, I whispered to myself, testing the words, letting them burn. I thought back to all the times I'd been left out before. Birthday dinners I'd heard about only through social media, family photos where I'd been cropped out or never asked to pose at all. They'd always found polite ways to dismiss me. But this was blunt, naked. I leaned against the counter, a strange clarity forming under the hurt. If I wasn't considered close, then what was I? Background. A placeholder. Someone they could call for favors, but never call for joy. Anger rose, not the kind that explodes, but the kind that settles deep, quiet, promising not to stay hidden forever. I picked up the phone again, stared at the screen. The last words glowed back at me. Just close family. My reflection in the darkened window stared back, eyes red-rimmed, but steadier than I expected. The words trailed from my lips, unfinished but heavy with intent. I didn't know the exact form my response would take. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to sit quietly in the corner any longer. I drove home from work that evening with the radio humming faintly in the background, but the words blurred into static as my mind kept circling around what Malvoria had said. Just close family. The phrase replayed again and again, each time slicing a little deeper. Passing through downtown, I slowed at a red light near one of the venues along the river. Through the glass windows, I caught a glimpse of tables draped in white linen, chairs tied with satin bows, chandeliers already lit, sparkling against the dusk. My stomach twisted. I knew those decorations weren't for me. They were for her celebration. I pressed harder on the gas pedal when the light turned green, eager to escape the sight. By the time I pulled into my father's driveway, the house stood still under the porch light as though nothing in the world had shifted. I stepped inside, and the faint smell of reheated food hit me. The kitchen was quiet, counters bare except for a plate wrapped in foil. It was obvious he had eaten earlier and left no thought for who might come after. The contrast was brutal. Out there, laughter and champagne. In here, silence and the faint hum of the refrigerator. I placed my keys down and exhaled. My chest ached with the weight of unsaid words. People often believe silence is kindness, but in families, silence can roar louder than anger. My mother used to say, not saying anything is also saying something. That night, I felt the truth of it settle into my bones. I found Dad in the living room, the TV glowing faintly with a rerun of a baseball game. He was in his recliner, slippers on, remote in hand. He didn't even turn when I entered. "Dad," I began cautiously, "did you know I wasn't invited to the dinner?" He shifted slightly, but kept his eyes fixed on the screen. His jaw moved as though he had words caught there, but nothing came out. "Did you know?" I pressed again, my voice firmer. Finally, he sighed, set the remote down, and looked at me. "Aurora, let's not make a scene. It's her night. Don't stir things up." I blinked at him, stunned at the casual dismissal. "Not make a scene. Dad, she told me I wasn't close family. Do you understand what that means?" His face hardened, lines deepening as he frowned. "You're reading too much into it. Malvoria has a lot on her plate. She just wants things simple." I felt my throat tighten. Simple? My laugh came out bitter. Simple as forgetting milk at the store. This was deliberate. And you're fine with it? He looked away, back to the glowing TV, and said nothing. The silence was worse than any insult. My own father would not defend me, not even enough to say my name at that table. If my own father won't say my name, I thought bitterly, what does that make me? I left the room before the tears could sting my eyes. My footsteps echoed down the hallway, pulling me toward the entry table where the mail had piled up. I sifted through envelopes, bills, catalogs, flyers, until I came across a neat stack of wedding invitations. Curiosity became dread as I slid one from its envelope, thick ivory cardstock, embossed lettering, gold trim. I traced the words with my finger. You are cordially invited to the wedding celebration of Malvoria, hosted by Laurentis and Malvoria. My breath caught. My name was nowhere. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an oversight. They had printed hundreds of these, sent them across the country, each one a declaration that I was erased. They didn't just forget, I whispered aloud, the paper trembling in my hands. They wrote me out. The shock burned into something colder. My pulse slowed, and a steadiness replaced the frantic hurt. The act wasn't just a slight, it was public humiliation. In American families, having your name absent from invitations is more than a clerical error. It's a statement, shouted without sound, that you do not belong. I carried the invitation to my room, each step heavy with betrayal. Once inside, I shut the door and leaned against it. The quiet pressed against me, but I refused to collapse into it. I laid the invitation flat on my desk, staring at the letters until they blurred. This wasn't new. I had spent a lifetime in the background, relegated to the youngest helper. I was the one asked to fetch, to carry, to tidy, but never the one celebrated. Birthdays blurred together where my cake was an afterthought. Family photos taken without me because, as they said, we'll get one later with you. Later never came. Many would recognize it for what it was, the invisible child syndrome. The youngest not cherished, but tolerated. Tonight it crystallized into something undeniable. I thought, steady and fierce. If you erase me on paper, I'll make sure you can't erase me in reality. I folded the invitation carefully, sliding it into the top drawer of my nightstand. Not as a keepsake, but as evidence. Evidence that one day would matter. Walking to the mirror, I caught my reflection, hair messy from the wind, eyes still wet, but fire glowing behind them. I whispered to the woman looking back at me, "You think I don't belong? Watch me." That night, I realized my father's silence hurt even more than her words. The morning light pressed in through the blinds, but instead of warmth, it carried the weight of last night. I woke with that same heaviness in my chest, my father's words echoing, "Let's not make a scene." The memory sat on me like a stone. I stayed in bed longer than usual, staring at the ceiling, trying to decide if getting up meant I was willing to face whatever new reminder of my place awaited me. Eventually, I pushed myself up, pulled on an old sweatshirt, and made coffee. The silence in the kitchen felt heavier than the steam rising from my cup. I reached for my phone out of habit, half dreading what waited. I knew better than to scroll, but temptation always won. My thumb hovered above the Facebook app. "Don't go looking for hurt," I muttered to myself. It was something a counselor once told me. Still, I tapped the icon. The screen lit up, and there it was, the post that shattered any illusion of calm. "Family only," Malvoria had written. Beneath the caption, a carousel of photos filled my screen. I felt my breath catch. There she was, my sister in her designer dress, a crystal glass raised, her smile wide and practiced. Around her, our cousins, aunts, uncles, even Dad, all smiling as if life had never been sweeter. I swiped through the pictures, champagne toasts, group shots, arms linked, laughter caught mid-motion. Each photo was a wound, because each one was proof I had been erased. The third image made me freeze. It was an old family picture, one I remembered being in. But in this version, I wasn't. They had cropped me out, leaving everyone else centered perfectly. My stomach flipped. I whispered aloud, "It's not what they post, it's what they don't post that tells the story." Humiliation pooled hot in my chest. This wasn't just forgetting to send me an invite. This was rewriting history. This was a declaration. My hands shook, but not from sadness alone. Anger burned underneath. She had made sure the whole world saw who counted as family, and who didn't. I dropped the phone face down on the counter, unable to keep looking. The silence of the house only amplified the laughter frozen in those images. It wasn't private pain anymore. It was public humiliation. I tried to distract myself with chores, folding laundry, wiping the counters, but the ache followed me. By late morning, I decided errands might at least give me air. I drove into town, the streets buzzing with people moving through their Saturday routines. I parked near the grocery store, hoping a list and a basket would keep me grounded. Inside, the aisles hummed with quiet chatter. I grabbed milk, bread, a few things for the week, but my mind was still stuck on those photographs. As I moved toward the checkout, a familiar voice called my name. Aurora? I turned. Thalia, my mother's old friend from church, was standing a few feet away, holding a bag of apples. Her smile was warm, genuine. "It's so good to see you," she said, touching my arm lightly. "Why didn't I see you at the dinner last night? I thought you'd be standing right beside your sister." Her words were innocent, spoken with genuine curiosity, but they pierced sharper than any insult. I forced a small smile, steadying my breath. "I wasn't invited." Her face fell. "Oh, I must have misunderstood. I assumed, of course." She trailed off, clearly embarrassed. I shook my head quickly. "It's fine, really. Don't worry about it." We chatted briefly about the weather, about her grandchildren, but I barely heard her words. Inside, my chest felt hollowed out. Even strangers had noticed my absence. Even people outside the family saw where I should have been, and wasn't. When I finally left the store, I sat in my car for a long minute, groceries forgotten in the seat beside me. My absence was louder than my presence could ever be. That thought echoed relentlessly. I drove home slowly, each stoplight a mirror reflecting my humiliation back at me. By the time I carried the bags inside, I felt the weight of every stare in town, real or imagined. Back in my room, I set the groceries aside and sat at my desk. My mother's words returned to me, soft but insistent. Dignity is not begging for a seat at a table that denies you. I picked up my journal and began to write, line by line, recording the slights, the moments, the humiliations. I didn't know exactly what I was preparing for, but I felt it forming, a ledger of truth. "They wanted me invisible," I whispered to the empty room. "They'll regret that." Even strangers knew I was missing, and that was my breaking point. The evening air inside the house felt thicker than usual, as though the walls themselves knew a secret I hadn't yet uncovered. Dad sat in his recliner with the TV flickering before him, but his eyes didn't track the screen. They wandered, unsettled, and every time I caught his glance, he turned away. His hand toyed with the remote, pressing the volume up and down without reason. On the side table, a pile of unopened mail tilted precariously. The sight of it gnawed at me. I dropped my bag on the chair and stood quietly, watching him. His stillness wasn't the comfort of routine. It was a shield. Something was tucked away beneath that silence, and I could feel it pressing against me as tangibly as the cool air in the room. Families in America may not speak about money openly, but documents, contracts, wills, deeds carry the weight of truth. I had grown up knowing that what is written is what lasts, while words can be twisted and forgotten. "Dad," I said carefully, "is there something you want to tell me?" He didn't answer. He just tapped the remote against the arm of the chair, a dull rhythm filling the quiet. I whispered to myself as I turned toward the stack of papers, "If they won't tell me, I'll find it myself." The mail crinkled under my hands as I sifted through it, bills and envelopes sliding over one another. My gut pulled me toward the cabinet by the hallway. I tugged open the drawer, and there it was, thicker, heavier than ordinary mail. A manila envelope stamped with legal lettering. My pulse quickened. I carried it to the kitchen table, my fingers trembling as I slid the papers out. The first page hit me like a punch. The contract for the wedding venue. My name, printed clearly across the header as the responsible party, not Malvoria's, mine. I blinked hard, reading it again to be sure. The embossed seal glistened in the light, mocking me with its permanence. I ran my fingertip over my name, the sharp ridges of ink pressing back as though reminding me this was real. "They used my name, my inheritance," I breathed, and still erased me. Each page confirmed the same: catering, deposits, payments, all tied to the estate my mother left. the estate she had entrusted to me. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was legal, inked into black and white. Shock spilled into something sharper. Malvoria had orchestrated her perfect wedding using the foundation of my mother's gift to me, and she had the audacity to cut me from every part of it. I clutched the stack to my chest and walked back to the living room. Dad's eyes flicked up, then quickly down, as if he'd been waiting for this moment and dreading it too. "Dad," my voice was steadier than I felt. "Did you sign this?" He shifted in his seat, his hand rubbing over his face. "Aurora, it's not what you think." I held the papers up. "It says here you signed." "Did you?" He exhaled, words stumbling out. "Malvoria said it would simplify things. She wanted everything streamlined, less confusing. I didn't think it mattered." "Didn't think it mattered?" My voice rose before I pulled it back, tight and low. "This is Mom's estate. She left it to me, and you let her take it." His eyes darted away again, guilt swimming in their corners. "She's under a lot of pressure. I didn't want conflict. Sometimes it's better to just go along." Go along. The words cracked something in me. My father's silence wasn't just passivity anymore. It was complicity. He hadn't stood up for me, hadn't even protected what my mother left in my care. He had handed it over, trading my place for his convenience. I stared at him, the man who had once held my hand at school recitals, who used to tell me my voice mattered. And now, his silence, his signature, was erasing me. Inside, the betrayal deepened, heavier than Malvoria's cruelty. If strangers cut you, you heal. If your father does, the wound becomes permanent. In this country, a signature is everything. It carries authority, it transfers power. He hadn't just let her diminish me, he had nearly erased my legal rights with the stroke of his pen. If my own father won't guard my name, I thought bitterly, I'll do it myself. I left him in his chair, retreating to my room with the papers pressed tightly against me. I spread them across the bed, each sheet like a shard of glass catching the lamplight. My mother's handwriting flickered in my memory, the way she kept every bill, every note neatly filed, teaching me that order was protection. She had trusted me to safeguard what was hers, what would become mine. And here I was, staring at proof that my sister and father had conspired to dismantle it. Betrayal from strangers wounds you once. Betrayal from family slices endlessly, every glance, every word reminding you of the cut. I sat cross-legged, gathering the papers into neat piles, my resolve stiffening with each movement. I wasn't keeping them for sentiment. They were evidence of theft, of manipulation, of lies written beneath their polished facades. "They used my name to build their fantasy," I murmured. "One day, I'll make them answer for it." I slid the contract and the rest of the documents into a folder, locked it in my drawer, and turned the key. Before shutting off the light, I glanced back toward the living room. I could see Dad's silhouette in the glow of the TV. He hadn't moved. His silence screamed louder than any words he could have spoken. If they thought I'd stay silent, they had no idea who they were dealing with. The following day, the house felt more like a museum than a home. I moved through the hallways quietly, the echoes of last night's confrontation still circling my mind. The folder with the wedding contracts and my father's reluctant admission weighed heavily on me, but it also stirred something deeper, an urge to return to the one place in this house where my mother still lived in fragments. I climbed the attic steps, each creak beneath my feet sounding like a protest. The attic smelled of cedar and old fabric, that comforting, aching scent of time preserved. Boxes were stacked neatly, labels in my mother's careful handwriting. Photos, Christmas ornaments, letters. At the far end, beneath a quilt folded precisely, sat her cedar chest. Kneeling, I brushed my fingers over the lid, hesitating before lifting it open. The hinges gave a soft groan, as though the chest too remembered the hands that used to tend it. Inside, everything was orderly. Linens wrapped in tissue, albums tied with ribbon, letters bundled in twine. My throat tightened at the sight. She had prepared these pieces of her life with the precision of someone who knew they would matter when she no longer could. As I shifted items gently aside, A sealed envelope slid into view. My name was written across it in her looping script. My hands trembled as I picked it up. For a moment I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It was as if she was standing there beside me. "Sometimes the dead speak louder than the living ever dared," I whispered. I broke the seal carefully, sliding the letter out. The paper was smooth but faintly yellowed, the ink still bold, her words alive even now. "Aurora," it began, "never let anyone erase your place in this family. You are the one I trust with what matters most. This house, this estate, this memory of me, they are yours to protect. If anyone tries to take it, know that I chose you." Never doubt that. My vision blurred. I pressed the letter to my chest, tears burning but not falling. She had known. Somehow she had anticipated this. The sadness was sharp, but woven through it was gratitude. She hadn't left me defenseless. She had left me a voice. Maya Angelou's words rose in my mind. To describe my mother would be to write about a hurricane in its perfect power. That was her, fierce, unstoppable, shaping everything in her path. And here she was, guiding me even from the silence of death. I read the letter again, slower this time, letting each phrase anchor me. She had acknowledged me not only as her child, but as the rightful heir to her life's work. Malvoria could erase me from pictures, from dinners, from invitations, but not from this, not from her will, not from her memory. I folded the letter and placed it gently on my lap, my fingers tracing her name at the bottom. And then, like a wave crashing back from the past, a memory returned. My mother, frail but still sharp, calling me into her room during those final weeks. "Promise me," she had said, her voice thin but steady, "you'll keep our family together." I had nodded, holding her hand, assuring her I would. Back then, I thought it meant smoothing conflicts, staying quiet so peace could exist. Now the guilt swelled, because the family was more fractured than ever, and I was powerless to heal it. But then another layer of her words pressed on me. Keep our family together. Maybe it wasn't about appeasement. Maybe it was about holding fast to the truth of who we were and not letting lies destroy that. Perhaps her promise was less about silence and more about standing firm, refusing to let myself be erased. In American families, the youngest is often expected to be the peacemaker, the one who bends so others don't break. I had worn that role like a second skin. But maybe she had meant something else entirely, that keeping us together meant refusing to let one person tear us apart. The guilt still burned, but it transformed into determination. My mother's words became not just a burden, but fuel. I placed the letter back into its envelope, treating it like sacred evidence, and carried it to my room. On the bed, I laid it beside the wedding contract. 2 pieces of proof, one of betrayal, one of trust. Malvoria might erase me from her glossy narrative, but not from the foundation my mother had built. I pressed both documents flat, sliding them into the folder with care. My grief, which had threatened to drown me, now hardened into resolve. If my mother had trusted me with her voice, I couldn't waste it on silence. "You gave me the tools, Mom," I whispered into the dimming light. "Now watch me use them." Her voice was gone, but her warning lived in my hands. It was only a few days later when my phone buzzed on the counter, the notification lighting up the screen with Malvoria's name. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Her Instagram post stared back at me. "Blessed with the best family." The photo was polished, almost too polished. My sister stood in the center, her fiancé beside her, both dressed in coordinated outfits as though they had stepped out of a magazine. Around them were our relatives, smiling with practiced ease, the lighting warm and flawless, like a staged advertisement. Everything about it screamed perfection, curated down to the last detail. Except for me. I wasn't there. Not a shadow, not even a mention in the caption. My absence wasn't an oversight. It was the sharp edge that made the picture gleam. The longer I stared at it, the more it felt less like celebration and more like a knife. "Perfection isn't about love," I murmured, setting the phone down before picking it back up again, unable to resist. "It's about control." Scrolling through, I knew exactly what she was doing. This wasn't family. It was fiction. She was presenting a version of life where I simply didn't exist, and strangers scrolling would never know the truth. For people my age and older, who had lived long enough to watch social media twist reality into an endless performance, it was familiar, sickeningly so. I clenched my jaw, heat rising in my chest. They aren't showing family, I told myself. They're showing fiction. The comments started pouring in. Such a beautiful family, wrote one cousin from out of state. Perfection, added another, attaching hearts and clapping hands. I scrolled, each word hammering home the message. My erasure was not only complete, it was applauded. Then one comment caught my eye. Where's Aurora? It stood there for a while, a tiny defiance among the sea of compliments. But minutes later, it vanished, deleted. That was when it hit me hardest. My existence wasn't just ignored, it was managed, scrubbed away like an inconvenient smudge on their glossy canvas. It wasn't a family dynamic anymore, it was a public relations campaign. I pressed my fingers to my temple, closing my eyes against the sting. The manipulation was blatant, and yet it worked. People believed the image because it was pretty, clean, curated, and I, the truth, was left in the margins, erased. Oscar Wilde's words surfaced in my mind, bitterly fitting. The truth is rarely pure and never simple. My hurt was still raw, but beneath it, anger began to take shape. If they were going to run this like a PR machine, then every lie they crafted was another piece of evidence I could hold against them. That evening, I sat on the couch, scrolling again when another message came through. This time, it wasn't a post. It was a screenshot from a cousin, one who rarely took sides but must have felt something was wrong. The image opened to a family group message. My stomach dropped. At the top was Malvoria's line, "Don't worry, Aurora won't be there. She doesn't fit the image." The words blurred for a second as my hands began to shake. Fit the image. That was the phrase. I read it again, slower this time. They hadn't just excluded me. They had labeled me as unworthy, a stain on their perfect narrative. A few relatives had responded with silence, their read receipts tiny betrayals. One had even sent a thumbs-up emoji, as if endorsing my removal. The humiliation from the dinner, the cropping from photos, the silence of my father, it all fused in that moment into something heavier, sharper. Shock pulsed through me first, but it cooled quickly, leaving behind a simmering rage that refused to explode outward. Instead, it settled deep, controlled. If they can write me out, I thought, gripping the phone tighter, I can write my way back in. I placed the phone down, pacing across the room. My mind raced with possibilities, with strategies. Rage had to be useful, or it would devour me. I returned to my desk, setting both the screenshot and the Instagram post side by side. Together, they weren't just insults, they were evidence, proof that the erasure wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. I opened my laptop, my fingers moving with purpose. One by one, I saved copies of the posts, the screenshots, each file tucked into a folder I labeled Truth. Then I backed them up, emailing them to myself. I wasn't just collecting fragments of humiliation, I was building a case, brick by brick. They turned me into an outsider on paper, I whispered, eyes fixed on the glow of the screen. But I'll make them witnesses of their own cruelty. The grief still gnawed at me, but it was no longer raw. It was tempered into something steadier, something I could wield. Closing the laptop, I sat back and let the silence of the room settle around me. Then I whispered into the dim light, if they want a perfect picture, I'll be the shadow they can't crop out. They were building their illusion on my erasure, and I finally had the proof. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, my decision had already solidified. I couldn't keep circling my anger in silence. If silence had been my cage, tonight I was determined to break it. I grabbed my keys and drove toward Malvoria's neighborhood, each turn of the wheel winding my nerves tighter. The streets were lined with neatly trimmed lawns and curated porches, the kind of suburban perfection that matched her obsession with appearances. Her house was no different. Spotless white shutters, manicured hedges, porch lights glowing warm and welcoming, though I knew what lay beneath that glow. As I parked in front, I sat in the car for a moment, steadying my breath. My hands clenched around the steering wheel, then released, over and over. You teach people how to treat you by what you allow, I whispered, recalling the saying that had lodged itself in my mind. Tonight, I would not allow it anymore. With that thought, I stepped out and walked up the pathway. The windows glowed with light, laughter echoing faintly inside. I rang the bell, and when Malvoria opened the door, her smile flickered with irritation before settling into a practiced mask. "Aurora," she said smoothly, "I wasn't expecting you." "No," I answered, stepping inside. "You weren't." The confrontation began without ceremony. I faced her directly in the living room, the space staged to impress, floral arrangements on the mantel, silver trays already polished for tomorrow's brunch. "Why did you erase me?" I asked, my voice calm but sharp. "From the dinner, from the invitations, from everything." Her expression hardened, but she kept her tone light, almost mocking. "Oh, Aurora, you've always been the extra one. We didn't want you ruining the family image." The words struck, but I stood my ground. "Family image? That's what this is about? Pictures and posts?" "Yes," she said bluntly, smirking. "That's exactly what this is about. People don't need to see every crack, every inconvenience. You don't fit the picture, and Dad knows it too. He didn't stop me, did he? He knows what's best for appearances." Hearing her drag my father's silence into the light was worse than the insult itself. It was confirmation. "You think cutting me out makes you stronger?" I asked. "All it shows is your fear." Her eyes narrowed. "Fear? No, Aurora. Control. And you've lost yours." My anger flared, humiliation rising again, but I swallowed it back, keeping my voice even. "No. You've mistaken my silence for weakness. That ends now." Her laugh was short, dismissive. She turned away, as if the conversation bored her. Then, in a move designed to wound, she pointed toward the dining room. "If you want to be useful, set the table for tomorrow's brunch. Plates are in the cabinet." For a moment, I froze, the sting of her words rooting me in place. She had cast me not as family, but as staff in her house. The humiliation seared through me, but I picked up the stack of plates anyway, placing them one by one on the table. I moved slowly, deliberately, each sound of porcelain on wood ringing louder in my chest. Halfway through, I stopped. My hands stilled. I set the last plate down and looked up at her. She was watching me with satisfaction, like a queen delegating to a servant. They wanted me to serve, not to stand, I thought bitterly. That was their mistake. I pushed the remaining stack of plates aside and straightened my shoulders. "No," I said firmly, the word cutting through the silence. "I won't do this." Her brow arched, annoyance flickering in her gaze. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." I stepped back from the table. "You can stage your photos, polish your image, but you will not use me to prop it up anymore." Her smirk returned, brittle this time. "You'll regret that." I met her eyes. "So will you." The silence that followed was thick, every unspoken word between us heavy in the air. Without another glance, I turned and walked out. The night air hit me like a release, cool against the fire in my chest. I walked to my car with steady steps, not defeated, but calculating. As I gripped the steering wheel again, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Her greatest strength is her costume," I whispered to the empty car, "but her greatest weakness is the truth." I sat there for a long moment, the plan already forming in the back of my mind. Malvoria lived for her image, every photo, every staged moment carefully curated. And that was where I would strike. Revenge, I thought, is a dish best served cold. I turned the key in the ignition and drove away, whispering into the night. Tonight she saw my silence. Tomorrow she will see my strike. If she thought reducing me to a servant would end me, she had just written her own downfall. The afternoon sun slanted low as I pulled into Malvoria's driveway. From the outside, the house sparkled with the energy of a place preparing for celebration. Cars lined the street, voices drifted through the open windows, and I could hear the clinking of glasses carried out on the breeze. I stepped inside under the pretense of helping with last-minute details, but my purpose was clearer to me. I needed to see, to listen, to understand just how far they would go. I kept myself in the background at first, arranging napkins, moving trays, listening to the shuffle of relatives moving in and out of rooms. The air buzzed with rehearsed laughter. Then I caught it. My sister's voice, lowered in a conspiratorial whisper as she leaned toward one of our aunts near the staircase. "If she shows up," Malvoria said, her tone clipped, "just seat her near the staff table." My stomach dropped. The words struck like a slap. I froze, every sound around me dimming except those syllables echoing in my head. Seat me with the staff. She wasn't just excluding me from the heart of her wedding. She was planning my humiliation, deliberate and public. A wave of heat burned through me, not of shame, but of fury. In America, everyone knows that where you sit at a wedding means something. It signals your place, close family at the front, extended relatives a bit further, acquaintances at the edges, and now she wanted to bury me at the margins, invisible among the hired help. Even the seat you're given says who you are in their eyes, I thought bitterly. And in her eyes, I wasn't a sister. I was an afterthought, an embarrassment to be hidden away. I pressed my lips together, steadying my breath. This was no mistake, no oversight. This was planned cruelty. Later, I joined the swirl of relatives in the living room, trying to mask the storm inside me. Conversation flitted from the menu to the guest list, to the weather. And then Aurora, a cousin who had always delighted in veiled jabs, leaned back in her chair and smirked. "Well," she said casually, her voice carrying just enough for everyone to hear, "your sister always had the brains. You're more like the helper." The room chuckled faintly, the sound of complicity disguised as amusement. My chest tightened, but I steadied my voice. "Excuse me?" Aurora waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, don't be so sensitive. It was just a joke." But the sting landed. It wasn't just a joke. It was confirmation of what they all believed, what they were too polite, or too cowardly, to say outright. I scanned the faces around the room. No one defended me. Some looked away. A few smirked. One or two sipped their drinks in silence. Their passivity was as cruel as her words. I realized in that moment I was surrounded not by family, but by passive accomplices. Each silence was another knife. The humiliation simmered, but I refused to let it spill. Instead, I let it crystallize into something colder. I took a breath, squared my shoulders, and spoke clearly. "I may be the youngest," I said, my voice cutting through the murmur, "but don't mistake silence for weakness." The room froze. My words hung heavy, sharper than I intended. A hush fell for a brief, startling moment. Malvoria's laugh broke it, light and dismissive, the laugh of someone desperate to maintain control. "Aurora," she said sweetly, "don't be dramatic. We all know where everyone belongs." I met her gaze, unwavering. "You ignore me, then you laugh at me. I suppose next you'll fight me. But you know what comes after that." The quote ran through my mind. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. Her smile faltered for half a heartbeat before she turned away, muttering something to her fiancé. I saw the tightness in her jaw, the crack in her composure. She was clinging to control with desperate fingers. I let the silence stretch, then stood. "Enjoy your planning," I said evenly. "I'll see myself out." I left the gathering earlier than expected, slipping through the front door while chatter resumed behind me. I refused to stay, to serve, to let them pretend I was part of their charade. As I walked to my car, the air cooled, the late sun dipping lower. I whispered to myself, steady and sure, "This ends on my terms, not theirs." Inside the car, I gripped the wheel, my reflection in the rearview mirror, calm but fierce. My mind had already shifted toward the wedding day. I knew what they intended for me, but this time, I would not play along. On the surface, I looked composed, but beneath it was a storm building, gathering power. They wanted me invisible, subservient, silent. but I would make sure the next act would not be theirs to write. I closed my eyes briefly, then opened them with resolve. If they want to put me at the staff table, I whispered, I'll flip the whole table over. The next gathering would not be theirs to script, it would be mine. I woke up restless, my body heavy with the weight of everything I had endured, but my mind sharper than ever. I brewed coffee and sat at the kitchen table, trying to distract myself with the rising steam, when my phone buzzed. A notification popped up. My cousin in California had posted new photos. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened the app and my breath caught. It was the rehearsal dinner. Laughter filled every frame. Malvoria glowed in the center, wearing white satin, her fiancé beaming beside her. Dad stood proudly, raising a toast, his glass catching the light. Relatives I hadn't seen in years surrounded them, clapping, smiling, posing for photos that would live online forever. But I wasn't there. The realization burned deeper than before. It wasn't just the engagement dinner. It wasn't just the invitations. They had cut me out of the rehearsal dinner too, one of the most intimate rituals of an American wedding. The rehearsal isn't about show, it's about belonging, about stepping into the circle before the real vows are spoken. And my absence, so deliberate, shouted louder than any words. Erasure isn't an accident, I whispered to the empty room. It's a pattern. I scrolled through image after image, each one carving out a deeper wound. The ache grew into rage because the truth was undeniable. They weren't simply excluding me from a single event. They were rehearsing a future where I did not exist. I pulled out my journal and began to write, each line a record, a ledger of wounds. The engagement dinner, the cropped photographs, the erased invitations, the whispers about staff seating, now the rehearsal dinner. I documented everything, page after page, as if building a case. They weren't just keeping me out, I wrote bitterly. They were rehearsing a life without me. Grief swirled, but it hardened into something else. Cold preparation. My mother's voice whispered in my memory, reminding me not to let anyone erase my place. There's an old African proverb I once read. The axe forgets, but the tree remembers. I pressed my pen into the page so hard the letters etched grooves. They'll remember this tree, I vowed silently. That evening, I drove to the wedding venue under the guise of checking details. I told the receptionist I needed to confirm something on behalf of the family. She barely questioned me. My name was on the documents after all. I walked through the grand hall, chandeliers above me, polished floors gleaming, each detail shouting opulence. But all I saw was my mother's signature in memory, the way she had chosen this place, tied it to me. As I stood there, a voice broke through my thoughts. Miss Aurora? I turned. A woman in her 40s, dressed in staff uniform, approached me cautiously. Her badge read, Inara. Yes? I asked, wary. She lowered her voice, glancing around. I remember your mother. She insisted this venue stay in your name. She was clear about it. I froze. You knew her? Inara nodded. I handled some of the earlier contracts. She was very specific. She said, this will belong to Aurora. Make sure it stays that way. My throat tightened. Validation from an outsider hit harder than anything my family had ever given me. The words filled the cracks their silence had left. Thank you, I whispered, blinking back tears. You don't know how much that means. Her hand rested briefly on my arm before she walked away. That fleeting moment felt like an anchor, something real in the sea of betrayal. Sometimes strangers honor your place more than your blood ever will, I thought, clutching the folder tighter. I gathered the contract, my mother's letter still tucked safely with it, and walked slowly through the ballroom. Each step echoed with resolve. My silence had shielded me so far, but now it would become my weapon. They rehearsed a dinner without me, I whispered. I'll rehearse my strike without them. The calm that settled over me was not peace, it was the quiet before a storm. I left the building, folder in hand, my expression unreadable. Outside, a group of relatives stood snapping selfies near the fountain. One camera caught me in the background, walking past unnoticed, folder pressed against my chest. They thought they had rehearsed a future without me. Tomorrow, I would write the final act, The Hilton Ballroom in downtown Portland gleamed as though the entire city had been wrapped in silk and crystal. Chandeliers spilled warm light onto rows of polished tables, each adorned with ivory linens and centerpieces of pale roses. I slipped in through a side entrance, unnoticed, blending in with the staff setting champagne glasses in precise rows. I wasn't a guest. I was an unacknowledged figure standing just beyond the glow of their celebration. Guests arrived in gowns and tailored suits, their voices carrying the high pitch of excitement that weddings always inspire. Laughter bubbled as people greeted each other with hugs and compliments. I stood near a marble column, hands folded calmly over the folder pressed against my side. Every detail screamed perfection, but to me, it looked fragile, like porcelain about to crack. They rehearsed a wedding without me, I told myself silently. Today, I rehearsed their downfall. I let the anticipation sharpen me rather than weaken me. My anger was no longer ablaze, it was a steady flame, controlled and waiting. The ceremony began smoothly. Malvoria walked down the aisle, glowing in her white dress, her fiancé smiling as though they were models in an advertisement. Guests rose, clapping, phones lifted to capture the moment. My father stood tall beside them, proud and solemn, as though nothing in the past weeks had happened. My name might have been erased from their mouths, but my presence remained, unseen in the back. The vows were exchanged, rings slipped onto fingers, applause filling the room. For a moment, everything seemed perfect. But I knew the perfection wouldn't last. As the reception began, guests drifted into the ballroom, voices raised in delight as they admired the feast laid out. Silver trays, polished cutlery, bottles of wine opened with flourish. Then Valentris, the MC, tapped his microphone and smiled broadly. Before dinner is served, we just need to confirm the balance with the venue. Formalities, of course. I held my breath. The staff whispered among themselves, then one hurried across the room to confer with the coordinator. A moment later, the whispering swelled into murmurs. Finally, the announcement came, firm and clear. The payment didn't go through. Silence fell, punctuated by gasps. Guests exchanged looks, confusion rippling through the crowd. A woman near me muttered, "What does that mean?" Another whispered, "Surely it's just a mistake." My father's face drained of color, his shoulders sagging under the weight of the words. Malvoria's cheeks flushed crimson, her eyes darting furiously at the staff, her perfect image beginning to crumble. The ballroom filled with overlapping voices. Unbelievable! At a wedding? How embarrassing! I watched from the edge, my calm deepening as their chaos spread. For once, the embarrassment wasn't mine to carry, and then, when the murmurs reached a peak, I stepped forward. I walked with measured steps, my heels clicking against the marble floor. All eyes turned as I reached the head table, the folder in my hand. I set it down firmly in front of Malvoria and Laurentis. "You said the engagement dinner wasn't for me," I began, my voice steady, carrying through the silence. "But this wedding stands on my name." Gasps rippled through the crowd. People leaned closer, whispers spreading like wildfire. I opened the folder, sliding out the contract, the embossed seal gleaming under the lights. Here is the truth. Every deposit, every reservation, every flower and glass of champagne, it was signed under me, built on what my mother entrusted to me. I looked directly at my sister. "You erased me from your family, but you built this entire show on me." The silence was suffocating, heavy with scandal. In America, there are few humiliations more cutting than a public unmasking at a wedding. The gossip would travel faster than any toast ever could. Malvoria's mouth opened, but no sound came. Her fiancé looked stricken, glancing between her and the papers. Guests murmured, some clutching their pearls, others exchanging gleeful looks at the drama unfolding before them. "Unbelievable," someone whispered. "She cut her out, but used her to pay for it all." My father reached for me, his voice trembling. "Aurora, we can fix this." I cut him off with silence. My refusal to answer said more than words could. I gathered the folder calmly, sliding the papers back inside. My dignity had already spoken. I turned and walked toward the ballroom doors, the crowd parting instinctively, their eyes following me. Behind me, Malvoria stammered, trying to collect her image, but the damage was irreversible. Shame was written across her face, the collapse of her perfect illusion. At the threshold, I stopped. Slowly, I turned back to face them all, my sister pale and trembling, my father still frozen. "Enjoy your dinner," I said, my voice cold but even. "Without me, there is no family here." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Then I pushed the doors open and stepped into the hallway. The sound of the ballroom, heavy with murmurs and disgrace, faded behind me as the doors closed. In my hands, I carried not only the folder, but the truth. I left them with their chaos, and I carried the truth in my hands. When the ballroom doors closed behind me, the muffled chaos of whispers and gasps lingered in my ears like an echo I couldn't shake. Outside, the night air hit cool against my skin, the drizzle of Portland rain beginning to fall, slicking the pavement until neon signs reflected in long streaks of color. My heels clicked softly as I walked toward the car, each step measured, the adrenaline from my confrontation finally dissolving into a deep, bone-heavy exhaustion. I paused at the curb, breathing in the scent of wet asphalt, thinking, sometimes leaving is the loudest thing you can do. I slid into the driver's seat, hands gripping the wheel, rain dotting the windshield. My body trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer release of standing up after so long being silent. My mother's words, my own vow, all of it hummed inside me. People often say, silence is golden. But tonight, I realized another truth. Leaving is platinum. Walking away wasn't weakness. It was the strongest act I had ever carried out. The drive home was quiet, only the rhythm of rain against the roof keeping me company. I replayed the scene again and again, Malvoria's face draining of color when I laid the contract before her, father's trembling voice trying to patch what could never be fixed, the chorus of whispers from guests who had seen the truth spill out under chandeliers. Back at the house, I set my folder on the table and opened my journal. Methodically, I wrote everything down, the words I spoke, the way the crowd reacted, the evidence I had held in my hand. My handwriting was steady, almost detached, as if I were both the witness and the subject of the trial. Hurt still lived inside me, but it was now outweighed by something stronger, the knowledge that I had reclaimed power. I didn't win them back, I wrote, pausing to underline the words. I won myself back. The thought stayed with me as I closed the book and carried the folder into my room. On the dresser sat my mother's cedar box, the one I had carried from the attic weeks before. I opened it gently, placing both the letter she had written me and the contract I had defended beside each other. Together, they were my shield and my sword, her voice guiding me and my evidence protecting me. "Mom," I whispered softly, touching the folded letter. "I kept my promise. I didn't let them erase me." I realized then that keeping the family together had never meant surrendering my dignity for peace. It meant standing firm when others tried to fracture me away. American families fracture often. Siblings turning into rivals, parents choosing silence over justice. Healing doesn't always come from smoothing edges. Sometimes it comes from walking away with dignity intact. "Sometimes you don't get closure," I whispered into the dim light. "You just get clarity." I closed the box and pushed it gently back into its place. Then I sat at my desk and drafted one final note, not to my sister, not to my father, but to myself. An email addressed to family members, short and clear. I would no longer be the silent helper, the one they called for errands but never for joy. I was resigning from that role. Their story could continue however they chose to tell it. Mine would begin anew. The thought sparked something daring inside me. For the first time in years, I opened my laptop not for work, not for their demands, but for myself. I pulled up a map and began searching destinations, the coast, the mountains, anywhere that was mine alone. I deserved a trip, even a small one, something my mother would have encouraged, something she would have called a step toward your own life. Closing the laptop, I looked at my reflection in the window. My face was calm, my eyes sharper than they had been in years. I felt independence flowing in me like a steady current, quiet but unstoppable. Before bed, I whispered into the silence of my room. I left the wreckage behind. Tomorrow, I'll start building something new. For the first time, I felt the silence wasn't theirs, it was mine, and it was freedom. I woke to a stillness I hadn't felt in years. The house was quiet, not heavy or suffocating as it often had been, but light, like the air after a storm has finally passed. I sat up slowly, letting the morning sunlight fall across the room. For the first time, silence didn't feel like their weapon anymore. It felt like my freedom. I padded barefoot into the kitchen, poured a cup of coffee, and leaned against the counter. The steam curled upward, warm and grounding. My thoughts drifted to the ballroom last night. The gasps, the scandal, Malvoria's perfect image crumbling in front of everyone. I hadn't needed to scream, hadn't needed to fight. I had simply revealed the truth, and that had been enough to shatter everything. In America, wedding scandals don't stay private. They ripple out like stones dropped in water, whispers on the phone, text messages pinging back and forth, photos and video clips shared faster than they can be deleted. Malvoria's illusion was gone, and with it, her grip on me. I sipped my coffee, closing my eyes. Relief mingled with satisfaction. I didn't just survive their silence. I had broken free of it. I set the mug down and opened my laptop. My fingers hovered over the keyboard before moving with a clarity I hadn't felt before. One by one, I attached the documents, the contracts in my name, the screenshots of their words erasing me, the receipts of betrayal. I drafted an email to relatives, to family friends, to those who had clapped at the wedding without knowing the truth. If they want the truth hidden, I murmured, I'll place it where everyone can see it. I didn't accuse, I didn't embellish, I simply presented the facts. The contracts showed whose name the wedding had been built on. The messages showed how deliberate my exclusion had been. That was enough. The facts speak louder than any scream I could give, I whispered as I hit send. In American families, reputation is currency, and today, I had withdrawn mine from their account and left theirs bankrupt. I closed the laptop, exhaling. A sense of calm spread through me. The final blow had landed, not in anger, but in truth. That afternoon, I went to the closet and pulled down the family album my mother had always kept. The leather cover was worn at the corners, the pages heavy with decades of birthdays, graduations, holidays. I flipped through each one, feeling the familiar ache as I saw how often I'd been missing, how many memories had been staged without me. Toward the back, I reached the blank page my mother had left open. She must have meant it for future photos, perhaps for my milestones, my family someday. To me, it now symbolized something deeper, a space she had preserved, even unknowingly, for me. I retrieved the wedding contract and her letter from my drawer. My hands shook as I slid them into place on that page, pressing them flat against the paper. They erased me from their pictures, I said softly. But my mother left space for me all along. Tears pricked my eyes, but they didn't fall. Grief softened into closure, closure into honor. I thought of something I'd once read. We don't get to choose our family, but we choose what part of them we carry forward. I chose to carry her love, her foresight, her trust in me, not their cruelty. I closed the album and locked it away. Then, with a deep breath, I sat down at my desk and opened a travel website. My heart pounded with the simple audacity of it. I typed in destinations along the Oregon coast, places I had always wanted to see but never allowed myself. For years, I had postponed joy, telling myself family obligations came first. Not anymore. Clicking through photos of rocky cliffs and crashing waves, I smiled for the first time in what felt like ages. I booked the trip without hesitation. Family isn't who you sit with at the table, I said to myself. It's who lets you stand as yourself. That night, I stood at the window, the last light of day giving way to stars. I whispered into the quiet, not to them, but to myself. The wreckage is theirs. The dawn is mine. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for an invitation. I was writing my own,